If the term Messiah just means anointed one, right? Was there ever a sense that there might be, multiple messiahs or multiple anointed ones? Or how do we get to this idea of there being the Messiah, the one?
That's a great way to put the question, really. So the roots, I think, and most scholars would think of messianic expectation in Judaism, go back to David. Because as a king, the king is anointed, literally with oil. So are other people in ancient Israel. Priest would be anointed, for example. And you could talk about a prophet being anointed, but the king was anointed and is called the anointed one sometimes in the Psalms. So you have passages, for example, the prophet Samuel tells David that his kingdom will never end. And some of the Hebrew prophets talk about a descendant or a root of David establishing an eternal kingdom. And this is after David had long been dead. Some of it written long after David's dynasty had died out. But that hope that there will be a ruler who makes everything right is sort of the heart of Jewish messianic expectation. And so we see traces of this even in the New Testament. I think one of the best examples would be the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus has been raised from the dead. He's walking, two of his followers are walking to Emmaus, and they don't recognize that the risen Jesus is walking with them. And they're talking about Jesus, and they say, we thought he would be the one who would redeem Israel. That's Messiah talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus has been crucified, so it's not looking that way. And in Acts, so Luke 24, Acts 1, written by the same person, back-to-back chapters in that way, the end of Luke and the beginning of Acts, the disciples are gathered around the risen Jesus, and they want to know is this the time that you'll restore the kingdom to Israel? Messiah language, there's a lot more evidence in the Gospels that that's how people were expecting a Messiah, a sort of royal deliverer who would make things right based on the kingdom of David. So that seems to be the root of it in ancient Judaism.
Yeah. Um, I love that road to Emmaus story for so many reasons.
I
Um,
do too.
but it's just one of my favorite stories. And I love at the end, when they finally do realize it was Jesus and they say, weren't our hearts burning within us? It's just a very cool story.
Yeah.
But yeah, so even the disciples, as we see in the New Testament, some of them started to recognize that something special was going on with Jesus, right? And some of them even call him Messiah. But it seems that they were expecting something different, right? They were expecting him to overthrow the Romans and restore Israel, and that's not what happened.
You see that real clearly in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, especially the way Mark tells the story of Jesus. So, a lot of church people will be familiar with the passage where Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say I am? And Peter eventually says, well, you're the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus then, he doesn't say you're right. He says, well, let me tell you, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed. He's going to suffer. He's going to be killed. And he's going to be raised on the third day. So Jesus switches the term to that term, Son of Man, from Daniel 7. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with that, but that's important. And once Jesus has explained that this Messiah doesn't grab a sword and drive out the Romans and establish this kingdom, Mark says Peter scolds Jesus. He doesn't say what Peter said to Jesus, but he scolds Jesus. And then Jesus scolds Peter. Get behind me, Satan. You're not thinking God's things, you're thinking the things of mortals. So it looks like Peter has that conventional understanding of what a Messiah should be, and Jesus isn't having that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's Mark 8. In Mark 9, Jesus repeats the whole thing about the Son of Man. And in Mark 10, he repeats it. And in each place, the disciples immediately show that they don't understand what he's talking about. So that's sort of like what's in Luke. We have these things where Jesus is trying to explain his mission to the disciples, and they just cannot get the idea of a Messiah who undergoes suffering and death, or even resurrection.